Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Weekend Bible Study. Now, before we start back into Ezekiel, remember the 4 questions that we talked about earlier that we're going to try to answer? Is the temple and its worship literal or figurative? Second, do these things take place at a time now past or at some point in the future? 3, if the time is future, does it involve the millennial kingdom of Christ on earth or the heavenly state? And 4, in any case, what is the purpose of the sacrifices described? You ready? Well, freshen up your cup of coffee, open your notebooks and your Bibles to Ezekiel 43. Chapter 43 begins to rotate into a different thing. First of all, he has set us up with all the dimensions, outline, layout, the whole thing. By the way, if you go to my website, rondart.com, Weekend Bible Study, Ezekiel, I've got 2 links up there that translate the dimensions out into, our own dimensions, feet, yards, miles, or whatever it is we got. It makes it a lot easier to visualize what you're dealing with there. So you can find that there. You can also find a link to, I think it's gateway.com, which actually has huge list of Bible translations you can check if you want to and look at the different aspects of this thing. So he's told us all of that. We've basically skimmed it. Oh, and by the way, there is also a link there to a artist representation of Ezekiel's temple to give you a little bit of a visual idea of what we're talking about. So having got that in our minds, he now turns to what's going to happen there. Afterward, Ezekiel says, "The man brought me to the gate, even the gate that looks toward the east. And behold, the glory of the God of Israel came from the way of the east. His voice was like the voice of many waters, and the earth shined with his glory." What a thing this must have been to see. "It was according to the appearance of the vision I saw, even just like the vision I saw when I came to destroy the city. And the visions were like the vision that I saw by the river Kibar." Same thing. "And I fell on my face." I have an idea that was not even voluntary. I think he fell on his face because he couldn't do anything else. Can you imagine realizing what you're seeing when this incredible vision comes rolling out of the east and comes right on down toward you? And he says, "The glory of the Lord came into the house by way of the gate whose prospect is toward the east. So the Spirit took me up and brought me to the inner court, and behold, the glory of the Lord filled the house." I can't even imagine it. The brilliance must have been heart-stopping. "Well, I heard him speaking to me out of the house, and the man stood by me. And he said, 'Son of man, the place of my throne, the place of the soles of my feet, where I will dwell in the midst of the children of Israel forever, and my holy name shall the house of Israel no more defile. Neither they nor their kings by their whoredoms, nor by the carcasses of their kings in their high places.'" This is staggering in reading what's going on here. This place, he says, it must be figurative, at least to this, that is the place where the soles of his feet stand, where he lives in the midst of the children of Israel forever. When did that happen? How did it happen? In answer to our questions, it's awfully hard to imagine that as having taken place at any time in history. He then goes on to talk about the defilement the children of Israel had done. He said, "In their setting of their threshold by my thresholds, and their post by my posts, and the wall between me and them, they have even defiled my holy name by their abominations that they have committed. So I have consumed them in my anger." Thresholds? What an odd construction. As it's rendered, it doesn't say anything to me. They put their thresholds by my thresholds. But the Hebrew word kaf, here rendered thresholds, is rendered elsewhere as a door, gates, posts, bowls, and basins, and maybe some other stuff. It really makes you wonder how on earth something can mean that many different things, and I guess you understand it by the context it falls in. But I went back and I ran all 33 occasions in the Old Testament where that word is used, and I am none the wiser about it. Oddly, though, I still understand, I think, what God is talking about because of other historical and prophetic references. We know from Josiah that they had moved temple prostitutes right into the temple precincts, and they had the threshold of a sodomite right next to the threshold of the priest's quarters. God says they just moved their filth right in on my house. This is all the stronger when you consider the context and where God is when he is speaking. And you mean you're going to bring that abomination into this place? You mean you're going to get over there in one of those cubicles and do that? Now, verse 9, he says, let them put away their prostitution and the carcasses of their kings way from me, and I will dwell in the midst of them forever. Not sure what he means by the carcasses of their kings, but there was a time, I think, when I thought when he spoke of whoredoms and prostitutions, he is speaking religiously. In other words, that they're going over here and worshiping this other god and calling, this is what amounts to prostitution because they're supposed to be worshiping me. I think it's literal. I think, in fact, they were practicing prostitution in the temple of God. Real temple prostitutes, men, women, and, yes, children. You son of man, you show the house to the house of Israel that they may be ashamed of their iniquities, and let them measure the pattern. Listen to this carefully. This is kind of a repetition. He says, if they be ashamed of all that they have done, show them the form of the house. Presumably, if they weren't ashamed, he wouldn't do it. Show them the fashion of it. Show the goings out and the comings in, and all the forms thereof, and all the ordinances thereof, and all the forms thereof, all the laws thereof. Write it down so they can keep the whole form and all the ordinances and do them. This is the law of the house. Upon the top of the mountain, the whole limit thereof round about shall be most holy. Behold, this is the law of the house. What was that? He put it before and after. It is the building, and everything around it is most holy. And these are the measures of the altar after the cubits. He gives us some more measurements in this point. Verse 19. And you shall give to the priests the Levites that be of the seed of Zadok, who approach unto me, to minister to me. You give them a young bullock for a sin offering. You take some of the blood, you put it on the four horns of the altar, and on the foot and corners of the settle, and upon the border round about, you cleanse it, and purge it by the blood. You shall take the bullock also of the sin offering. He shall burn it in the appointed place of the house outside the sanctuary. And on the second day you shall offer a kid of the goats without blemish for a sin offering. Now that's interesting. We just had the first day, I presume. Now he's talking about something we're going to do on the second day. You shall offer a kid of the goats without blemish for a sin offering, and they shall cleanse the altar as they did cleanse it with the bullock. When you have made an end of cleansing it, you shall offer a young bullock without blemish, a ram of the first of the flock without blemish. You shall offer them before the Lord. The priest shall cast salt upon them, and they shall offer them up for a burnt offering to the Lord. Question was asked, are these sacrifices real, literal? And what are they for? Then he says, 7 days shall you prepare every day a goat for a sin offering. They shall also prepare the bullock and the ram out of the flock. 7 days shall they purge the altar and purify it. They shall consecrate themselves. And when the days are expired, it shall be that upon the 8th day and so forward, the priest shall make your burnt offerings on the altar. So what's it for? What it's for is the cleansing of all this, the removal of sin. Symbolically, all of the offerings that were made in the temple were all symbolic. They were literal enough, real enough, but symbolic nevertheless. Now, interestingly enough, this sounds a lot like the Feast of Tabernacles, 7 days followed by an 8th day. And it brought back to mind one of my favorite trivia questions I used to ask my Old Testament survey class when we had read through this section. Because if you read Numbers 29, that's what we're talking about. If you want to test yourself, just stop the tape, read Numbers 29, and see if you notice anything. Anyhow, On the 15th day of the 7th month, you have a holy convocation. You do no servile work. We all understand that. So you get together, it's a Sabbath day, and you have a feast. You shall offer a burnt offering, a sacrifice made by fire, a sweet savor to the Lord. Okay, what do we offer? 13 young bullocks, 2 rams, 14 lambs of the first year, 1 kid of the goats for a sin offering, beside the continual burnt offering, his meal offering, and his drink offering. Okay, got it? On the 2nd day, you offer 12 young bullocks, 2 rams, 14 lambs of the first year, 1 kid of the goats without a sin offering. On the 3rd day, you offer 11 bullocks, 2 rams. You know, I know this stuff makes your eyes glaze over when you're reading it, doesn't it? But did you notice it? The number of bullocks offered goes down 1 every day through the first 7 days of the Feast of Tabernacles. Day 4, there are 10 bullocks. Day 5, 9. Day 6, 8. Day 7, 7. Everything else in those offerings is all the same every day. Isn't that neat? However, on the 8th day you shall have a solemn assembly, no servile work therein. It's a holy day. You shall offer a burnt offering, a sacrifice made by fire, 1 bullock, 1 ram, 7 lambs of the first year without blemish. Now, for whatever reason, the 8th day is set apart from the other days, and if you didn't see it any other way, you can sure see it in the pattern of these offerings. You can get the impression that the 8th day is not really a part of the Feast of Tabernacles. It is a separate holy day all of itself. 2 questions to consider. What might be the meaning of the declining offerings throughout the feast? And second, if this is the Feast of Tabernacles, why the constancy of these offerings? Now, I'll begin to tell you that is in this particular case in Ezekiel. I'll tell you to begin with, there's not enough data to reach a firm conclusion. I think these little questions are sprinkled through the book to keep us on our toes, to make us think, to say, wait a minute, why is that there? Maybe you'll come to an answer now. Maybe you won't. Maybe you'll come to it or stumble onto it at some time in the future. I can't tell you how many times that's happened to me in the years that I've been doing this, where I think I understand something, and then later on something comes by from another source, another angle, and I see it in a whole new light from what I saw it before. I could tick them off on my fingers, but I won't take the time to do it now. Okay, what about our 4 questions? Is the temple and its worship literal or figurative? Now let me add, it's possible that it could be both, literal and figurative. It sounds awfully literal, doesn't it? You know, all these animals and everything, and the priests in a certain lineage are designated to be doing these things. Sounds real. Do these things take place at a time now past or at some point in the future? Well, this temple has never existed. There are those who think there will be another temple in this age, that there has to be a temple built before Christ's return. Some think it's a temple for the millennium, and then we can put all these on the table and think about them. And third, if the time is future, does it involve the millennial kingdom of Christ on earth or the heavenly state? Now, I'm not sure what the author meant by the heavenly state, but the offerings sure seem to be literal and earthly. It doesn't seem to be somewhere else. And it's awfully hard to imagine them in a heavenly state or in heaven. Besides, consider what Paul said about this in Hebrews. Hebrews chapter 9, verse 21. Moreover, Moses sprinkled with blood both the tabernacle and all the vessels of the ministry. And almost all things are, by the law, purged with blood. And there could be a whole story behind that. And without the shedding of blood, there is no remission. It was therefore necessary that the patterns of things in the heavens, what does it mean by that? Well, Moses was told to build all this stuff when he built it after the pattern that had been shown to him, and apparently they are a pattern of something that existed in heaven. He saw in a vision, I presume, and got all the instructions about a tabernacle in heaven and built one on earth just like it. And he says it's necessary that the pattern be purified with the blood of animals and sprinkled all over it. But the heavenly things themselves with better sacrifices than these. What's that about? Well, it's basically what he's driving at is that it is Christ himself and his blood that purifies the things in heaven. Now, I suggest you read that whole chapter 9 of Hebrews at your leisure, because there's a lot in there that relates to some of this. Now, number 4 of the questions, in any case, what is the purpose of the sacrifices described? Apparently, symbolic purification for continuing sacrifices after this period of time. That's what it's all for. And the purification in heaven, as it were, is done by Christ, ongoing. Then he brought me back by the weight of the gate of the outward sanctuary that looked toward the east, and it was shut. Then said the Lord to me, This gate shall be shut. It shall not be opened, and no man shall enter in by it, because the Lord, the God of Israel, has entered in by it. Therefore it shall be shut. Now, just a reminder, when you're reading this kind of thing, it's awfully easy to overlook it. Whenever you see the small caps Lord in the text of the Old Testament, that's talking about the Hebrew word Yahweh, Jehovah, as it is often rendered in Egypt. So, no man shall enter in by this, because Yahweh, the God of Israel, has entered in by it, therefore it shall be shut. It is for the prince he shall sit in it to eat bread before the Lord. He shall, before Yahweh, he shall enter in by the gate of the porch of that gate, and shall go out by the way of the same. Note the singular. In the millennium, there will be but one prince, not princes like there were throughout the Old Testament. One prince, Jesus, who will fulfill the role of David. And yet, what we seem to be seeing here is that there is a human prince who is eating and drinking in the presence of Yahweh. So just hold that in your mind, keep it in mind. Someday, somehow, it may make sense in a way that maybe it doesn't now. Anyway, he brought me by the way of the north gate before the house. Couldn't come in the east gate, had to come in the north gate. I had looked and said, The glory of the Lord filled the house. It's still lit up. I fell on my face, and the Lord said to me, Son of man, mark well, behold with your eyes, hear with your ears, all that I say to you concerning the ordinances of the house of the Lord, and all the laws thereof, and mark well the entering in of the house with every going forth of the sanctuary. Difficult read, isn't it? It may be a little bit better in some of the other translations. But basically what he's telling you, I want you to write down everything. This is the way things are going to be here. Now I want you to say to the rebellious, even to the house of Israel, they're still out there and they still had to be dealt with, Thus saith the Lord God, O you house of Israel, let it be enough of all your abominations, in that you have brought into my sanctuary strangers, uncircumcised in heart and uncircumcised in flesh, into my sanctuary to pollute it, even my house, when you offer my bread, the fat, and the blood, and they have broken my covenant because of all your abominations. And you have not kept the charge of my holy things, but have set keepers of my charge and my sanctuary for yourselves. What does he mean there? You know, it almost sounds like he is saying that the legitimate priests used hired hands for the work of the Levites. And when I think about it, I would not be at all surprised that they do that. He says, Thus saith the Lord, no stranger, uncircumcised in heart, nor uncircumcised in flesh, shall enter into my sanctuary, of any stranger among the children of Israel. Note the double circumcision required. Not only a true Levite, but a converted one as well. Circumcised in heart. And the Levites that have gone far away from me when Israel went astray, who went astray after their idols, they shall even bear their iniquity. This expression, bear their iniquity, means bear their responsibility. They shall be ministers in my sanctuary, having charge at the gate of the house, ministering to the house. They will kill the burnt offering and the sacrifice for the people, and they shall stand before them to minister to them. It sure sounds literal, doesn't it? It sounds real. It sounds like a real temple, real Levites, who are now measuring up to the standards God intended for them. But since it was conditional, this temple was never built. And apparently, all this stuff never came into play. Now, I'm puzzled a little bit by it. For one thing, Israel did learn some lessons. When archaeologists go through, digging up the old towns in Israel and so forth, in the pre-exile layers, they find many, many little pagan icons. They have this little Ashtaroth image that's everywhere down there, a little image of a woman holding her breasts in her hands for a child to nurse, or anyway, for mankind to nurse, if in the case of Ashtaroth. Found them everywhere. I saw in Biblical Archaeology Review a letter to the editor once, who were really complaining about him putting that picture in there. I said, my kids may be looking at this. I don't know what to make of that. But nevertheless, they were there. Then, after the exile, in those layers that are developed after Israel returned, there are none of those images at all. So the captivity did serve a purpose. It did get rid of paganism. It got rid of the pagan practices. It got rid of the temple prostitutes. It got rid of selling your kids off into prostitution. And they really did change a lot of stuff. But I suppose we could say that the Second Temple was a fulfillment of it, because they were doing the sacrifices there when Jesus came to it. But it didn't meet these dimensions at all, and one does wonder exactly how to take that. I will leave it on the shelf and say, there it is. We'll revisit it someday, and maybe we'll understand it. Anyhow, he said they're going to stand there to minister to them. Because they ministered unto them before their idols, caused the house of Israel to fall into iniquity, I have lifted up my hand against them, says the Lord. They will bear the responsibility. They will not come near to me to do the office of a priest, nor to come near to any of my holy things in the most holy place. They shall bear their shame and their abominations which they have committed. Now, I want to remind you of something here, because if you've been paying attention, you've probably noticed that we're getting some repetition coming back and forth in here, and some contrast being drawn that in simple prose don't seem to work quite right. I remind you, this may well at this point be a musical presentation, so that, it conveyed a certain meaning, and the repetition and the variation became an important part of the presentation to the people. But he said, I will make them keepers of the charge of the house. Even though they have done these things in the past, I'm cleaning them up. They're going to go back in and do it now. For all the service and all that should be done. For the priests, the Levites, the sons of Zadok, that kept charge of my sanctuary when the children of Israel went astray from me, I will let them come near to me. They shall stand before me to offer the fat and the blood, says the Lord. Okay. They will enter into my sanctuary. They will come near to my table to minister to me, and they shall keep my charge. It sounds like a song. And it shall come to pass that when they enter into the gates of the inner court, they will be clothed with linen garments. No wool shall come upon them while they minister in the gates of the inner court and within. They shall have linen bonnets upon their head and linen breeches upon their loins. They shall not gird themselves with anything that causes sweat. It seems odd, but everything here seems in general accordance with the commands that Moses gave these people generations and generations before. We're going to restore everything like it is supposed to be and like it was supposed to be at the beginning. When they go out in the outer court, even to the utter court of the people, then they take off these garments wherewith they ministered. They lay them in the holy chambers. They put on their outer garments, and they shall sanctify the people of Israel with their garments. Neither shall they shave their heads, nor suffer their locks to grow long. They shall get a haircut. It's as simple as that. They shall pull their heads, all right? No more shaving of the heads for a common pagan practice, and they're not going to have long hair. They go get a haircut if they're going to actually serve in this temple. Neither shall the priest drink wine when they enter into the inner court. Now, from that I conclude that preachers should not drink wine before speaking. For example, if you have an evening service, we used to have at the Feast of Tabernacles a lot. If you had the sermon that evening, you should not have anything to drink with your dinner, because you're not supposed to drink wine before speaking. Believe it or not, that has been done in the past. Neither shall they take for their wives a widow, nor her that is put away. They shall take maidens of the seed of the house of Israel, or a widow that was the wife of a priest before who died. Now this again is in complete comport with the law of Moses. They shall teach my people the difference between the holy and the profane, and cause them to discern between the unclean and the clean. And in controversy they shall stand in judgment, and judge according to my judgments. They'll keep my law and my statutes and all my assemblies, and hallow my Sabbaths. These are the holy days he's talking about. They are obviously permanent. And the word for assemblies is the same as the word for holy days in Leviticus 23. Also, if you compare this statement in verse 24, they stand in judgment, read the 17th chapter of Deuteronomy. For in fact, a judiciary of just these people was established from the very beginning. You have a case under the law, you go to these people, they hear it, and they judge according to God's judgments. He goes on to say, they shall not come at any dead person to defile themselves, although for father or mother or son or daughter or brother or sister, they may defile themselves. And that sister that has no husband. After he is cleansed, they shall reckon unto him 7 days. And in the day he goes into the sanctuary, into the inner court to minister there, he offers his sin offering. It shall be to them for an inheritance. I am their inheritance. You shall give them no possession in Israel. This goes all the way back to the law of Moses. When they laid out the land by lot back then, they did not give Levi any inheritance in the land. Their inheritance was the tabernacle, the service of the tabernacle. They could own property in the cities and so forth. But they didn't have a lot because God was their possession. They had the meat offerings, the sin offerings, the trespassing. Every dedicated thing in Israel was given to them, all their gifts. Now, you can chase down the marginal references, but this is a pretty close reiteration of the instructions that Moses gave to Israel. I have a strong sense that the priests who returned from Babylon saw themselves in this role carrying out these instructions. As to the question whether it's literal or figurative, I have little doubt that the priests who returned saw it as literal. I don't know what they thought about the dimensions, because I think they built on the foundations of Solomon's temple, same dimensions, same everything, and did not necessarily go to Ezekiel to see what it was supposed to be. Chapter 45 raises an interesting question. Let's see if you pick it up. Moreover, when you shall divide the land by lot for inheritance, you shall offer a special gift to the Lord, a holy portion of the land. The length shall be the length of 5 and 20,000 reeds. I forget what that is. The breadth shall be 10,000. If you get the English, you'll have it. This shall be holy in all the borders round about it. Now, you see anything odd about that? It brought me up short because I had assumed that the original lots were permanent. The dividing of the land up by lots. Remember when it came into it? Judah had their land, Ephraim had theirs, Zebulun had theirs, and that land stayed in the family by lot, theoretically, forever. Now he seems to be saying we're going to do it again. And we've got a very, very large area of land for God. In the original division of the land, the tabernacle was in Shiloh, not Jerusalem. Moreover, God didn't even want a temple. Now, he seems to say he does. Now, the dimensions of the holy area are given. You may want to read this in one of your translations for the measurements, okay? Here, this comes from the Good News Bible. Next to the holy area, another section, 10 miles long and 2 miles wide, is to be set aside for a city where any of the people of Israel may live. That's a pretty big town. There's to be land for the prince. Land is to be set aside for the ruling prince. From the west boundary of the holy area, it will extend west to the Mediterranean Sea. From the east boundary, it goes to the eastern border of the country. So its length will be the same as the length of one of the areas allotted to the tribes of Israel. In fact, the whole layout of these lots seems to be completely different from what it was originally. This area will be the share the ruling prince will have in the land of Israel, so he will no longer oppress the people, but will let the rest of the country belong to the tribes of Israel. The sovereign Lord said, "You have sinned too long, you rulers of Israel. Stop your violence and oppression. Do what is right and just. You must never again drive my people off their land. I, the sovereign Lord, am telling you this." Now that is interesting. You ever think about this? We have a District of Columbia that belongs to the government. I mean, it is the government. That's where its the seat is. The rest of the country is supposed to belong to the people privately. Eminent domain was not allowed in Israel. Property rights were to be guaranteed. And we're fooling around with that today and driving people off of their just land, the land that they inherited from their father and their grandfather and their great-grandfather. And some city is declaring eminent domain over it so they can turn it over for the development of a higher tax-paying entity. This is incredible. God said, calls this oppression by government, and that's exactly what it is. Now, their property rights, he said, they're going to be guaranteed. He goes on to say, "You shall have just balances. Your measurements shall be equal." We have that today in the Bureau of Standards, and you begin to wonder when somebody's going to mess around with that. Then there follow all the details. "All the people of the land shall give this special gift for the prince in Israel. It shall be the prince's part to give burnt offerings, meal offerings, drink offerings, and the feasts and the new moons and the Sabbaths and all the solemnities of Israel. He shall prepare the sin offering and the meal offering and the burnt offering and the peace offerings." So the prince is the priest. This interesting thing here, Jesus himself turns out to be a priest king, not just a priest and not just a king. But anyhow, the question we still are leaving in the air is this something for the future of us? Was it something that was supposed to have been done when Israel came back from Babylon and wasn't really quite done? Just what is it? Answer, we don't know. And I think we need to stay in that position until we know more than we do today. "Thus saith the Lord God, in the first month and the first day of the month, you shall take a young bullock without blemish and cleanse the sanctuary. The priest shall take the blood of the sin offering." All this sounds so much like everything that was done back in Leviticus. And it is very similar, and in some cases identical. "In the first month, in the 14th day of the month," verse 21, "you shall have a Passover, a feast of 7 days, unleavened bread shall be eaten." Going forward. Now, if it's a millennial temple we're talking about here, then we still very much have the holy days in the millennium, don't we? "Upon that day the prince shall prepare for himself and for all the people in the land a bullock for a sin offering." And not a good country to be a bullock, is it? 7 days of the feast he shall prepare a burnt offering for the Lord. 7 bullocks, 7 rams without blemish, daily the 7 days. Notice the difference? The numbers are different now from what they were in the book of Numbers, in the law of God, the law of Moses. "He shall prepare a meal offering of an ephah for a bullock, an ephah for a ram, and a hin of oil for an ephah." All these amounts and so forth, these will be in your different translations. "In the 7th month, the 15th day of the month, he shall do like in the feast of the 7 days, according to the sin offerings, according to the burnt offerings, according to the meal offerings, according to the oil." And so it goes. We don't really know much about this, and it takes a little more patience, frankly, than I have, to struggle through every last little tiny detail. I notice that the Expositor's Bible Commentary doesn't do that either. They actually brush over a great deal of this because the actual practical application of it seems to be for another time and another place, and the symbolism for us is limited at best. Well, that's it for today. I have a couple of questions, but I'm going to hold them over. Send your emails to me at ron@borntowin.net. Until next Friday.